Hi, I'm Janice Switlo, and today I'm going to speak about the role of spiritual terrorism in the construct of Canada. Now, Indigenous nationals will be very familiar with what I would suggest by that statement, and that is, of course, being dragged away from their loving homes, put into residential schools where they were indoctrinated and forced to accept Christianity and to leave behind their quote-unquote heathen and evil ways. But I'm going to now speak about the role that spiritual terrorism placed on the Canadian side of things. What was going on as Canada started to be formed. And this is back in 1871. There broke out a violent struggle between the two political parties in 1871 with the issue of the Catholic program. This famous document was a manifesto prepared by a group of editors and lawyers who, in their own words, belonged heart and soul to the ultramontane school. It sought to lay down a policy to govern all good Catholics in the coming elections. The doctrine of the separation of church and state, the document declared, was impious and absurd. On the contrary, the authorities of the state and the electors who choose them must act in perfect accord with the teachings of the church and endeavor to safeguard its interests by making such changes in the laws as the bishops might demand. To secure this end, the Conservative Party must be supported. When two conservatives or two liberals are running, the one who accepted the program was to be elected. Where a conservative and a liberal were opposed, the former would be supported. If it happened that a conservative who opposed the program was running against a liberal who accepted it, the situation would be more delicate. And Catholics should not vote at all. This frank declaration of war on the Liberal Party was an attempt to throw the solid Catholic vote to the Conservatives, at once aroused violent controversy. Two bishops announced that they approved the manifesto in every point, while others declared that it had not their authorization. So even within the Catholic Church, there was debate about whether this was appropriate or not. In 1873, a brief pastoral was issued by all the bishops condemning Catholic liberalism in vague but sweeping terms. 2 years later, another joint pastoral, that of September 22, 1875, went into the whole question elaborately. Catholic liberalism, that subtle serpent, was again denounced. The right of the clergy to intervene in politics was again upheld, whether in neutral matters in which they, like all other citizens, should have a voice, or in matters affecting faith or morals or the interests of the church. In the latter case, the clergy would declare with authority that to vote in this or that way is a sin, exposing the offender to the penalties of the church. In a letter issued a year later, Archbishop Taschereau modified these pretensions, but the assault went on. Regarding the identity of the Catholic liberals in question, both pastorals were silent, but not silent were many of the clergy who interpreted them to their flocks. The cap fitted the Liberal Party and its chief, they averred, and good Catholics must govern themselves accordingly. This determined attempt of a section of the clergy to use the influence they possessed as spiritual guides to crush one political party aroused the most moderate sections of the liberals to counterattacks. And here's an example. The candidate who spoke last Sunday, declared one priest in Chambly, called himself a moderate liberal. As Catholics, you cannot vote for him. You cannot vote for a liberal, nor for a moderate liberal. For moderate is only another term for liar. The church has condemned liberalism, and to vote against the direction of the bishops would be sin, declared another. The sky of heaven is blue, the fire of hell is rouge, another more pointedly urged. I was afraid, one witness testified, that if I voted for Tremblay, I should be damned. In defense, it was urged that, in the first place, the civil courts had no authority over ecclesiastics, at least for acts done in their spiritual capacity. And in the second place, that the church had a right to defend its interests against attacks, and that in using to this end all the powers at its disposal, it was employing no undue influence. The author of the Catholic program, Judge Rothier, upheld these contentions in the first trial of a particular case, but the Supreme Court, delivered by Mr. Justice Taschereau, brother of the Archbishop, and by Mr. Justice Ritchie, denied the existence of any clerical immunity from civil jurisdiction and found that the threats which had been made from the pulpit constituted undue influence of the clearest kind. Accordingly, they voided the election. Their action met with violent protests from some of the bishops who, when a judge in a certain case followed this precedent, sought but in vain to have him removed from the sacred congregation from his chair in the law faculty of Laval. So these matters, it's important to understand. It reaches into the law schools, always has. Who will be teaching who what the law of Canada is and how the next lawyers will be shaped. But this is going back, and I digress there a bit. This is going back to show that the darkness, if you will. You know, Canada commenced in darkness. Indigenous nations had long since passed that kind of stage. They had progressed to light, if I can put it into those simple terms. But yet it was the Indigenous nationals who were condemned as being on the dark side and being on the evil side, and who had to change. Really, when you look at the quality of their life, how they distributed wealth, how their governments actually work when not interfered with, all of the concepts, for example, of status being determined by how much you ultimately gathered and then gave to your people, not gathered and kept for yourself. The status was achieved through helping, protecting, serving the people. Isn't that a really neat concept that maybe Canada should start thinking about embracing instead of following this kind of example? Who actually influences what in terms of Canadian politics? That's kind of a scary thing to even get into. And that's all I have to say.